It's been a while since I've made a video in this series, but I did finally get enough research done on 3 more individuals who, unfortunately, died in the 1920s. And they range from aviator to performer to emperor, and here are their stories. Bessie Coleman is decently well known today, yet her life story proves to be difficult to uncover since her paper trail is pretty small, but I'll do my best with what I have. And since there might not be many more opportunities for me to talk about her, I'll go through her whole life story leading up to her death as well. Bessie was born on January 26, 1892, and grew up in East Texas. Her father left the family when she was still young. Then her brothers left to find work, leaving her mother to raise 4 daughters by herself. Bessie attended a university in Oklahoma for 1 term, but ran out of money and had to return home. She married a man in 1917, and then decided to pursue aviation around 1919. This apparently stemmed from a comment her brother made that black women could never fly like French women did. Once Bessie got an idea to do something, she was determined to do it, and this was that something. Her race was a big obstacle in doing this, however, because she couldn't find a flying teacher willing to take her on. Her friend, Robert Abbott, editor of the black newspaper The Chicago Defender, recommended that she go to France since there were less hang-ups about race there. So Bessie quit her job as a manicurist and got a job as manager of a chili parlor to better fund this new dream, and she probably also got donations from elsewhere. She enrolled in a language school, and she eventually got into an aviation school in France in 1920 and completed a 7-month course. It also gave her her first experience of the dangers of flying when she watched a fellow student get killed in a plane crash. Crashes were very common at this time due to the still relatively primitive technology of airplanes. Bessie used her new experience to get an international flying license in June 1921, becoming the first black person to do so. This achievement gave her some degree of fame when she returned to the US. But while aviation was seen by many as a cool thing to do, there weren't yet many practical uses for it in the early 1920s. And what few job opportunities there were still difficult for Bessie to get due to her race. She did some public exhibitions of airplane stunt flying, called barnstorming, but decided to go back to France to learn more advanced flying techniques. She also went to the Netherlands and met with the renowned airplane designer Anthony Fokker, then went to Germany for additional training. Upon returning to the US again, she had a fancy new uniform to bring greater respectability to what she was doing. She could be her own publicity agent when she wanted to, sometimes exaggerating details about herself and her life, including making herself a few years younger to make her achievements look that much more impressive. On October 12, 1922, she was the main attraction at the Negro Tri-State Fair in Memphis, Tennessee. At events like these, she would do things like figure eights in the air and take people up for rides. Bessie also received an offer to be featured in a black movie, but she apparently reneged because she thought the movie had too many black stereotypes in it. Having built somewhat of a name for herself, Bessie wanted to do something more, to open an aviation school specifically for black people. There was a hitch in this plan, however, when she crashed her newly purchased plane at an exhibition after the motor stalled and it nosedived, knocking Bessie unconscious. She also broke 3 ribs and 1 of her legs. This incident caused her to miss some scheduled performances. But she did eventually make a full recovery and got some gigs doing exhibition flights in Texas, and even did some lectures where she showed films of her flying. As with many stunt flyers, she had to keep upping the thrill level to please audiences, such as when she parachuted out of a plane at 3,000 feet in the air. Bessie expressed interest in having a movie made about her life, but the project unfortunately never got off the ground. Always plagued with not having enough of her own money to pursue her main project of opening a black flying school, she was able to get a new plane courtesy of Edwin M. Beeman of the Beeman Chewing Gum Company. But after a while, Bessie seemed to want to give up exhibition flying sometime in the near future to lecture and teach instead. But for the time being, she would continue doing her stunt flying, this time in Florida. Always willing to take a stand on certain issues, she threatened to withdraw from a show in Orlando after she found out that only white people would be allowed to attend. This strategy worked, and black people were then allowed to come and watch. After her new plane finally arrived, Bessie planned a performance in Jacksonville on April 30th, 1926, where she would again do a parachute jump from the plane. As she jumped, a 24-year-old white mechanic named William D. Wills would fly the plane. Bessie, too short to look out of the plane while sitting down, was peeking out of the cockpit trying to find a good place to jump when the plane suddenly accelerated and then began to nosedive, then went into a tailspin, then flipped upside down. Bessie wasn't fastened in her seat and fell out of the plane at 500 feet in the air, falling all the way to the ground. The fall, according to reports, broke every bone in her body, and she died instantly at only 34 years old. The plane kept going and clipped a tree, then crashed into a field. Any hope of possibly saving Wills was dashed when someone near the plane lit a match to light a cigarette, and this caused the gasoline fumes to ignite, setting the wreckage on fire. It was discovered that a wrench had lodged itself into the control gears, which had caused the plane to lose control. In a dark twist, onlookers took macabre souvenirs from the crash very shortly after the fire died down. Reportedly, over 5,000 people attended Bessie's memorial service. Bessie's death was a tragedy, but the fact that she's pretty well known today despite much of her life story being lost at least shows that she was successful in her mission. Her determination to break racial barriers has proven to be inspirational to many even in the present day. So at least her legacy lives on positively in this way. Even though I made a full-length video on Florence Mills before, I thought it was also appropriate to include her in this video as well. But if you haven't watched that video, I'll summarize her story here. Florence Mills was one of the preeminent stage performers of her day, of any race. The fact that she was a black woman who found success with mainstream white audiences shows how her appeal transcended race. Although she had been performing for years ever since she was a child, her big breakthrough came when she replaced Gertrude Saunders in the stage show Shuffle Along in the fall of 1921. Shuffle Along was important as the first really big all-black musical, and it was very successful among both white and black people. After this breakthrough, Florence starred in her own popular musical revue shows, mostly in after-dinner clubs based in New York City, although she also toured around other cities as well. She became an international sensation after going to England in 1923 with her troupe, and even more triumphantly in Paris, Belgium, and England again in 1926 with the show Blackbirds of 1926. She then appealed to highbrows with her concert performance of Levyland, an ambitious composition by black composer William Grant Still. While not among his most famous works, the premiere was at the illustrious Aeolian Hall in New York City, one of the most renowned venues in the country for any musical performer in the 1920s. Unfortunately, we have no record of any of Florence's performances aside from reviews and recollections. She did a test for a record, but it was scrapped, and no film footage of any of her performances was ever taken. But what we do know can give us a hint as to why she was so popular. First of all, she was very versatile. She specialized in ballads, but was also very proficient in jazz and blues numbers. Her voice was high-pitched and was often compared to a bird. She was also very famous for her dancing, but her style is harder to understand only from vague descriptions. She won over white audiences with her mainstream appeal, and won over black audiences with that plus her barrier breaking. Her signature song was "I'm a Little Blackbird Looking for a Bluebird." Florence was often more subtle about her comments on race, but this song about racial tolerance represented what she stood for. While in Europe the second time around, she was more vocal about racial prejudice in her home country and expressed her support for the NAACP. She had opportunities to do mainstream white shows, which was a rarity for any black performer, but she chose to stay on doing black shows. She even turned down an offer by Florenz Ziegfeld to star in one of his shows. It was a chance to reach the highest pinnacle of stage performance in the US, and she just said no. She had nothing against these white shows, but just didn't feel comfortable abandoning her own race. What also helped make her such a positive symbol of racial tolerance was that she was decidedly not scandalous. Overall, Florence's image was elegant, pure, and sophisticated, though some thought that her dancing may have been a bit too provocative. She and her husband, fellow performer Ulysses Slow Kid Thompson, also lived in a pretty modest home in Harlem, considering how much money they made. Thompson didn't do anything scandalous either, making them both pretty good role models. So, partly due to her good image, Florence transcended racial prejudice for many, even if she was still often seen and described in racialized terms. Florence had an incredible work ethic, rarely taking extended breaks. But by early 1926, she had worked 87 of the last 90 weeks and needed to take a rest. But she was soon back at performing, going on that second big tour in Paris, Belgium, and England. In April 1927, Blackbirds had finished its 250th performance, and Florence had done every single one of them. But her intense schedule had started to take a toll on her health. She was quoted as saying, "I love my work, but my nerves have gone to pieces. I feel quite all right on the stage, but the minute I come off, I simply collapse." And there was more to it than simply exhaustion. She began waking up in the middle of the night with stomach pain, so she eventually went to a doctor and got examined. The doctor diagnosed her with pelvic tuberculosis and advised her to stop performing for a while so she could get surgery. But Florence insisted that she finish out her scheduled performances around northern England before she got any surgery. Nobody was forcing her to do this. She was big enough in the theatrical world that she could have stopped right then and there for something like this. But performing was her life and love, so she did 6 more weeks of shows without anyone in the audience detecting that her health wasn't good. Then she further delayed the operation because she wanted to be near family and friends in New York during her recovery. Then her friend, the performer Ada Bricktop Smith, was in legal trouble in Germany, so Florence went over to help her out. Florence and Ulysses also took some trips around Europe, including the spa town of Baden-Baden, to help Florence regain her health. When she finally did get back to New York, her mother was worried about her surgery, so she delayed it again. She had needed the surgery months ago, and now her health was worse, and she needed it immediately. One of the last things she did before getting the surgery was to see Adelaide Hall perform at the Lincoln Theatre, and she was in good spirits, not outwardly worried about it. But she was in more danger than she realized. She finally went through with the operation in late October 1927 at the Hospital for Joint Diseases, but her recovery did not go well. Even now, she was still positive when her family and friends visited her, but the truth was that she was rapidly on the decline. When she really took a turn for the worse, Ulysses gave her an emergency blood transfusion, but it couldn't save her, and she died at 4 a.m. on November 1st, 1927, at only 31 years old. Her death was a shock to the public at home and abroad. Her planned surgery had been reported, but people weren't told how severe her illness had been. These reports and those of her death said she had had appendicitis, but pelvic tuberculosis was the actual cause of her death. She had delayed her surgery far too long in order to please her adoring public, to help her friend, and to ease her mother's anxieties, and unfortunately, that contributed a lot to her death. But it also showed just what kind of a person she was. After her death, stories came out about how, in her most recent trip to England, she had anonymously and secretly donated treats to hospital patients and given out money to poor people in the streets of London. A reported 200,000 people attended her funeral, 5,000 of them crammed into the church building, an unprecedented number for Harlem, with the rest standing outside. Some people charged admission for a good view of the church and the procession. The funeral was a depressing sight. Florence's mother begged that the coffin be opened again so she could see her daughter one last time. Cora Green, a fellow performer and longtime friend of Florence, sobbed loudly. One of the choir singers fainted and had to be carried out of the building. Many others fainted as well, from both the emotion and from the heat of so many people so close together. One man even died from a heart attack. While Florence Mills may be forgotten today, I want to quote one Black Chicago newspaper that said, "If you never met her, you should have. If you do not know of her, you must." This next person is someone most people have never thought about. Even in his home country of Japan, everyone forgets about him, which is somewhat surprising because he was the country's emperor for 14 years. His birth name was Yoshihito, but he's more commonly known by his reign name, Taisho. His father, Emperor Meiji, is one of Japan's most famous emperors. Meiji came to the throne at only 15 years old, and under his reign, Japan became modernized in many ways, including the establishment of a parliamentary body called the Diet. And Japan also started down the road to imperialism, colonialism, and empire. Suffice it to say, his were big shoes to fill. When Meiji died in 1912, Yoshihito became Emperor Taisho, but he was already set up to be a weak leader. When he was a child, he was diagnosed with meningitis, which left him in poor health for much of his life, and he was especially prone to long bouts of the common cold, pneumonia, and influenza. Taisho was also apparently not of high intelligence. His mental disability has never been specified, and the exact details of it were not completely understood then. But it seems that there was definitely a legitimate issue, possibly stemming from his meningitis, because he had trouble learning to read and write as a child. He was a bit of an embarrassment to the imperial establishment with his chain smoking and especially his womanizing habits, which they found distasteful for an emperor to engage in. They also didn't like his penchant for interacting with commoners informally, which they thought wasn't befitting an emperor, even if it brought him closer to the people he was actually ruling over. Taisho was rumored to have behaved strangely at times, such as when he reportedly rolled up his rescript papers and looked at everyone in the Diet through the tube like it was a telescope. Taisho lacked Meiji's ability to maneuver in politics, and was easy for others to manipulate to achieve their own goals. He seems to have had little influence over Japan's decision to enter World War I and to send troops during the Siberian intervention, which saw the Japanese military send more troops than the government had authorized. This was an early sign of the military's growing autonomy from the government. In 1919, Taisho was suffering from sciatica, then had a stroke which left him unbalanced and with an impaired memory, and caused him to slur his words. While he had lucid moments, for the most part, he was unable to perform his duties. At this time, the imperial court was concerned about the strength of their monarchy after many of Europe's monarchies were destroyed with the war, and Taisho was seen as a liability to the stability of Japan's emperor system. This was a time when strong leadership was needed, and Taisho simply couldn't provide that, and his inability to accomplish anything sometimes made him frustrated and depressed. When the 1920s began, there were serious discussions of introducing a regency, which would place Taisho's son Hirohito as regent. This would allow Hirohito to perform the duties of the emperor without actually being the emperor. Discussions on the topic went on from mid-1920 until the fall of 1921. By that time, Taisho's poor health was public knowledge through newspaper reports. The court had to convince Taisho's wife, Empress Sadako, to agree to a regency. She resisted the idea at first, but eventually gave her consent begrudgingly. A hitch in the regency plan came about when it was discovered that Hirohito's wife-to-be had color blindness running in her mother's family, and could possibly transfer it to the imperial line. But this concern soon passed, and Hirohito was made regent in November 1921. Taisho was now unofficially retired from his responsibilities, though he remained officially as the emperor. And Prince Regent Hirohito became the face of Japan's emperor system. In retirement, Taisho spent much of his time at one of the imperial villas outside of the capital. He was in the town of Nikko when the 1923 Kanto earthquake shook the nation and caused massive destruction in Tokyo. But Hirohito was the one who went on tours of the destruction and made public appearances. One of Taisho's very rare public appearances was a celebration of his 25th wedding anniversary in Tokyo in 1925. Shortly after that, in December 1925, he collapsed in his bathroom from a stroke, then had another stroke soon after that. Then he developed bronchitis and pneumonia in August 1926, and in early December that year, he had yet another stroke. He was completely confined to his bed, only able to eat a little bit of ice cream. His dire condition was publicized, and many ceremonies and celebrations were put off all around the country out of respect. This situation also gave Hirohito the opportunity to show official devotion to his emperor father by being by his bedside, which was important for showing the imperial system as a family, at least symbolically. Taisho died on December 25, 1926, at age 47, and his funeral took place on the night of February 8th and 9th, 1927. He was buried at the imperial graveyard near Tokyo. Hirohito then became emperor, taking the reign name Showa, though his official coronation wasn't until November 1928. Taisho's poor health and inability to rule meant that Showa already had 7 years of experience of essentially being the emperor before he officially became emperor. Showa later became an important historical figure, and he was one of Japan's longest reigning emperors when he died in 1989. Taisho being surrounded by much more famous and longer-serving emperors all but guaranteed that he would be forgotten. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something about these lesser-known people. None of them are super famous now, except maybe Bessie Coleman a little bit, so I wanted to shed some light on their stories. One thing I learned when I was living in Japan was that nobody even there remembers Taisho or knows much about him. And there are good reasons for that, but I can't help but feel kinda bad for him. Since it's pretty difficult to find information on him, I especially wanted to talk about him in this video. Usually he just briefly appears in books covering the Meiji and/or Showa eras. And with Bessie Coleman and Florence Mills, they each only have like one biography about them. So I guess relative obscurity was the theme for this video. Well, anyway, that's all for now, all you sheiks and gals out there, but stay tuned for more tales from the Jazz Age.